She shot him in the middle of a sermon. 2 bullets, 1 question. Tell them what you planted in Corus's garden. The congregation froze. His body hit the floor. Her face didn't flinch. But this wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't rage over cheating. And it damn sure wasn't about another woman. This was something else. Something buried. Literally. Because the man lying in a pool of blood was her husband, a respected pastor. And the garden he used to preach about? It was hiding something no one was supposed to find. What happens when a wife uncovers a secret so twisted, the only thing more terrifying than the truth is how long she helped cover it up. This isn't just betrayal. It's a demolition. A blood. Trust. A family. And she waited until Sunday morning to pull the trigger. When Eliam and Renell Trenholm pulled into Augusta in the spring of 2012, they didn't look like a couple starting over. They looked like a couple who had everything figured out. He was a calm, clean-cut man in his 40s with the polished restraint of someone used to leading quietly. She, slightly older, carried herself with the soft sternness of someone who didn't speak unless there was something worth saying. Together, they moved with the ease of 2 people who had learned how to survive a lot and say little about it. They didn't come with a moving truck, just a modest SUV packed with necessities and labeled bins. The house they were settling into wasn't theirs. It belonged to Renell's stepmother, Corus Denton, a woman who had taken Renell in as a teenager after her mother's passing. Now in her 60s and long retired from teaching, Corus lived alone in a split-level brick home on the east side of town. Her basement, partially finished and mostly used for storage, was offered up to the Trenholms without hesitation. To neighbors, the arrangement looked practical. Temporary. Respectable. Eliam had just launched a local ministry effort, a mentorship-based church focused on personal recovery and emotional order, as the flyers read. The couple framed the move as a spiritual assignment, helping struggling men adjust to life outside prison, providing faith-based counseling, and rebuilding families through structure. The messaging was clean. The mission looked noble. Donations trickled in early. Corus didn't interfere. She helped Renell set up their section of the house. She passed along old cookware, folded linens, made herself available when needed, and stepped back when not. In the weeks that followed, Eliam began spending more time out of the house than in it. Meetings, prison visits, late-night planning sessions with potential volunteers. Renell held the home front. She cooked. She cleaned. She kept to herself. When asked how the ministry was going, she always smiled and said, "It's moving. God is doing something." But the truth was, Corus had already started watching things more closely. Because it wasn't just the ministry Eliam was building. It was the narrative. And the deeper he went into perfecting it, the more Corus began to suspect. He wasn't here to restore broken people. He was here to keep one massive lie from collapsing. It started with a closed door and a name scribbled on a clipboard in the church's hallway, Keon Neil. 19 years old. No parents listed. Just a short note under his name, Phase 2, Residential Mentorship. Most people didn't question it. Eliam had spoken before about the church's commitment to men transitioning out of rehab. Real transformation requires real environments, he once said. And this? This was just that. Another broken young man getting his second chance. He moved into the Denton home quietly. No church announcement. No introduction. No prayer request. Keon began staying in the spare room in the basement, just down the hall from the Trenholms' unit. He came in through the side entrance and rarely interacted with anyone but Eliam. The few times Corus passed him in the hallway, he barely made eye contact. Renell didn't speak of him. She avoided the topic altogether. At first, Corus accepted the arrangement. She had always supported Renell's efforts to help others. If this young man needed shelter, so be it. But by the second week, things began to feel off. She noticed that Ilium started coming home later. That when he didn't go upstairs. He went downstairs, directly into the guest room. Sometimes they'd be down there for hours. Sometimes there was laughter. Sometimes, nothing but a long stretch of quiet followed by the creak of footsteps at 2 or 3 in the morning. Then there were the arguments. Muffled voices behind thin basement walls. Not loud enough to make out words, but sharp enough to signal tension. Once, Corus passed by the kitchen in the early morning and found Keon sitting at the table alone, shirtless, staring blankly at his phone with his bag half-packed at his feet. By noon, he was back in his room like nothing had happened. What made it worse was Ilium's explanation, or lack thereof. When asked directly, he simply told Corus that Keon was part of something bigger and just needed someone consistent. No timeline. No details. Just vague phrases about mentorship and divine alignment. It wasn't an answer. It was a shield. Corus began keeping notes. Not because she suspected something criminal, but because something wasn't right. Something in Keon's body language. Something in Ilium's growing defensiveness. Something in Renell's refusal to even say the boy's name. It was one night, just after midnight, when Corus stood by the hallway vent and heard it clearly, Ilium's voice telling Keon to calm down, and Keon saying "you promised," followed by the sound of something shattering. From that moment on, Corus didn't just feel uneasy. She knew she was being lied to. But what she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that what had started as a second chance for a young man was actually the unearthing of the first body. It was supposed to be a simple walk to the laundry room. Corus Denton wasn't snooping. She wasn't lurking. It was just after 10 p.m., and she'd gone downstairs to check the machine she thought she'd left running. The hallway light was dim. The basement was quiet, too quiet. That's when she heard the door to the guest room shift open. She turned the corner, and there it was. Ilium Trenholm. Keon Neil. Not just in the same room. Entangled. Shirtless. Frozen in panic. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. Corus dropped the laundry basket. What happened next was not calm. Not composed. Not rational. Corus didn't go upstairs. She didn't wait for Renell. She marched out the back door and into the yard, shouting for Ilium to follow her. And he did. Moments later, neighbors on either side heard raised voices, something heavy fall, and silence. But no one called the police. No one came out. It was just another night of noise in a neighborhood where people minded their own business. Corus never came back inside. By morning, her bedroom was untouched. Her phone sat charging on the nightstand. Her purse remained zipped, still hanging on the hook. Renell walked through the house slowly and then made the first call, not to the police, but to a longtime church member. She told them Corus had left unexpectedly. That she'd had a breakdown. That she'd packed a few things and said she needed space. The story spread fast. Corus had taken off. No forwarding address. No phone calls. Just gone. Renell repeated the story word for word in every conversation. Her tone never cracked. Her face never twitched. When asked if she was worried, she replied, "This isn't the first time she's needed to clear her head." But there was no suitcase missing. No withdrawals from Corus's bank account. Her prescriptions sat untouched. The only thing that had vanished was her. And the only person who seemed completely at peace with that was Ilium. He stood in church that Sunday like nothing had changed, his words focused on forgiveness, on moving forward, on choosing light even when others embraced disorder. There was no prayer request for Corus. No concern shared from the pulpit. Only silence. Behind closed doors, Renell didn't ask questions. She just wiped the back patio table clean. The concrete slab next to the garden looked new. No one asked about it. No one thought to. And by the time someone did, it was already too late. Corus Denton had been erased. And the man who erased her was standing in front of a congregation, still holding the mic. It wasn't Renell or Eliam who reported Corliss Denton missing. It was her neighbor. 3 weeks after anyone had last seen Corliss tending her garden or walking to the mailbox, a woman across the street grew concerned. She'd knocked twice. No answer. No movement through the curtains. No texts returned. After a final unanswered knock, she called it in. When officers showed up at the Denton home, Renell was calm. She told them Corliss had left for a personal retreat. No phone, no distractions, she explained. She needed space. When asked if Corliss had packed anything, Renell hesitated, then nodded. Said she thought so, but she couldn't say what. Inside the house, everything contradicted that claim. Corliss's wallet was still in the kitchen drawer. Her driver's license, medication, bank cards, untouched. Her phone charger was still plugged in beside the bed. The garden tools leaned against the back fence, mid-season, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment and never came back. There were no calls made from her phone after the night she vanished. No transactions. No messages. Just silence. When church members started asking, Renell gave the same line. She's okay. She just needed time. Eliam, when questioned directly, told a group of church leaders, "Let's not rush to fear. Let's stay grounded." That Sunday, he addressed the congregation with a voice that cracked ever so slightly. He said they were praying for clarity where confusion tries to take root, and told the church to remain focused on the vision, not the distractions. He didn't mention Corliss's name once. And no one pushed. Not yet. But the silence had started feeling different. Not heavy like grief, but strange like rot. And when silence starts to smell like something, people eventually start digging. It came in at 1:46 a.m. on a Wednesday. No caption. No sender name. Just a 17-second video clip dropped into the church's private WhatsApp group, the one reserved for ministry leaders, prayer coordinators, and trusted volunteers. At first, most ignored it. The thumbnail showed nothing but a dimly lit hallway. But curiosity got the better of them. The clip began with muffled voices. Corliss Denton's voice, sharp, clear, and unmistakably angry. "In my house? You think I don't know what I just saw? You brought that?" Then static. Movement. A hand. A voice, Eliam's, firm, low, trying to control the volume. The video cut off before anything was seen clearly. No faces. Just the heated edge of a confrontation that didn't belong in a church thread. Within 10 minutes, the clip was gone. Deleted from the group. Deleted from the app. Anyone who hadn't downloaded it lost access. Those who didn't speak of it, not publicly. But it left questions. The kind that fester. By sunrise, a different message appeared from a church admin. "Please disregard the previous video. It was fake and has been removed. We're investigating where it came from." 2 days later, during a leadership meeting, Renell was asked about it directly. She didn't flinch. She said the clip was manipulated and dangerous. That people had agendas and liked to create confusion. Eliam backed her up immediately. He called it a digital attack by enemies of progress. Said it was spliced audio and speculation, a sad product of jealousy over their growth. Some believed him. Others didn't. But no one said it out loud. Not yet. The source of the clip was never identified. The church's tech team claimed it had been sent from a cloned account using a VPN. The thread was locked down. Admin privileges were quietly reshuffled. And just like that, the confrontation that could have cracked the whole story open was reduced to a rumor. A ghost file. But the voice in that video wasn't rumor. It was Corliss Denton. And no one could explain how a woman who had supposedly left town was yelling in her kitchen days after she was last seen alive. No one else was home the day Renell Trenholm finally asked her husband what really happened to Corliss. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just asked. Ilium didn't pretend to misunderstand. He didn't delay or deflect. He answered with a kind of quiet readiness that made it clear. He'd known this moment was coming. He told her there had been an argument, that Corliss had overreacted, that she'd seen something out of context and lost control. He said he tried to calm her down, but she slipped during the struggle, hit her head, stopped moving. That's how he said it. She slipped. Not, I hurt her. Not, she died. Just that. He claimed panic. Claimed he froze. Claimed he buried her because he didn't want to see everything they'd built go up in smoke. He said he prayed over it. That it wasn't murder. That it was a tragic moment they had to survive, not confess. And then he made it her choice. He didn't tell Renell what to do. He told her what was at stake. The ministry. The men depending on them. The neighborhood. The people who believed in their marriage, their leadership, their message. He reminded her of the sacrifices they'd made to get there. The time. The image. The favor. He asked her to hold the line. For a long time, she said nothing. Renell wasn't the kind of woman who flinched easily. She had spent most of her adult life in the background, doing the work, carrying the weight, never asking to be seen. But she also knew what silence could cost. She'd seen it up close when her own mother died, leaving behind secrets no one dared to untangle. So when Ilium said Corliss had panicked and slipped, she understood what he was really saying. You're going to carry this with me, whether you want to or not. The next morning, Renell met with a handful of church elders. She looked them in the eyes and repeated what she'd been told to believe. Corliss had suffered a breakdown. She was unwell. She needed space. She never mentioned the video. She never mentioned the blood under the garden slab. She just nodded when they asked if everything was under control. And just like that, she became part of the story. That would eventually force her to destroy the man she thought she was saving. Corliss's daughter, Trinica Denton, hadn't spoken to her mother in over a year when the call came through. It wasn't from family. It wasn't even from Georgia. It was a friend of a friend who mentioned Corliss's name in passing, said she was missing. No one had heard from her in weeks. The church said she'd gone off the grid, that she needed time. But Trinica knew better. She packed a bag and took the next available bus from D.C. to Augusta. No dramatic entrance. No warning. Just a daughter returning with one purpose: answers. The history between her and Corliss wasn't clean. They had clashed for years, about control, about boundaries, about how Corliss had always prioritized everyone else. Especially Renell, the stepdaughter. When Trinica walked away, she did it without ceremony. And Corliss didn't come after her. But silence didn't mean detachment. And absence didn't mean she'd stopped paying attention. A month before Corliss disappeared, Trinica had come back into town quietly. She never went inside the house. Just sat in her car across the street and watched. What she saw unsettled her. Keon Neil, a young man she didn't recognize, walking into her mother's home at odd hours. A faint argument in the yard one night. A freshly poured slab behind the garden the next week. And then nothing. Trinica didn't confront anyone then. But she left behind a parting gift, a small, motion-triggered camera hidden in the garden fence, angled low and wide. Something she had bought months ago after a break-in at her apartment. She never told her mother it was there. Weeks later, when she learned of the disappearance, she accessed the footage remotely. And what she saw confirmed everything. She didn't go to the police. Not yet. She didn't shout, post online, or cause a scene. Instead, she copied the footage onto a USB stick, sealed it inside a plain manila envelope, and mailed it directly to the woman she held responsible for staying silent, Renell Trenholm. No return address. No message. Just truth. Because while the church kept praying and the neighborhood stayed quiet, there was a daughter watching from a distance. And she knew the difference between a missing woman and a buried one. It arrived in a plain, unmarked envelope. No name. No note. Just a small USB drive resting inside a folded sheet of blank paper. Renell Trenholm found it wedged in the corner of her church office mailbox, the kind of drop that leaves no fingerprints and no questions answered, only created. She locked the door before inserting it into her laptop. The file was unlabeled. One video. 36 minutes long. Motion triggered. Black and white. Grainy, but unmistakable. The camera caught the backyard in full view. At 1:12 a.m., Eliam Trenholm appeared in frame. Shirt off. Gloves on. Dragging what looked like a body wrapped in a blanket. No struggle. No movement. Nothing left to interpretation. Corliss Denton. He stopped near the flower bed she once tended every morning. Bent down. Moved bricks, not quickly, but deliberately, like a task rehearsed. The digging took time. The blanket was lowered into the earth with practiced ease. Dirt was returned. Stones realigned. He disappeared briefly off camera. At 4:09 a.m. he came back. This time with a bag of concrete mix. Renell didn't blink for the full duration of the footage. She sat still, absorbing every second, every detail. There was no accident, no fall, no panic, just execution, cleanup, and silence. The man she had built her entire adult life beside had buried her stepmother behind the home they shared, under the garden they prayed beside. And never once did he look like a man who regretted it. She closed the laptop, ejected the drive, wrapped it in the same blank paper and placed it in the back of a drawer beneath church receipts no one ever checked. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went home that night, folded clothes, sat beside Eliam on the couch while he reviewed sermon notes. And for 6 straight days, she said nothing. Not about the envelope. Not about the footage. Not about the garden. Just silence. But silence doesn't stay buried forever. Especially not when it's sitting over bones. The announcement came midweek. A special Sunday service. A vision sermon, Eliam Trenholm called it, a moment of redirection, renewal, and casting light on the next phase of their ministry. He said it was time to move forward, to shed confusion, to refocus on what truly matters. Flyers were printed. Social posts went out. Word spread fast. By Sunday morning, the church was full. Not packed like Easter or a funeral, but full enough that those who came felt like something important was about to happen. Trinica Denton slipped in early, unnoticed, and sat near the back. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't look around, just stared at the pulpit like she was waiting for something to confirm what she already knew. Up front, leaders shifted nervously. Eliam stood alone near the altar, flipping through notes, perfectly composed. His shirt was pressed. His voice, when he finally spoke, was smooth and steady. He greeted the congregation and thanked them for staying the course. He spoke of obstacles, of betrayal, of unseen warfare, but also of vision, of growth, of legacy. There was no mention of Corliss, no update, no prayer for her return. Then, halfway through the message, Renell walked in. She was dressed in light-colored clothes, pale cream and gray. Clean lines. Not flashy, but nothing like her usual dark tones. She moved slowly, purposefully, purse in hand. She didn't take her normal seat in the front. She stood in the aisle for a moment, then made her way to the second row, directly across from the pulpit. Eliam didn't falter. If he noticed, he didn't show it. He continued speaking, weaving his message into words about restoration, how pain could be repurposed, how the things buried beneath us could be used to grow something greater. No one else in the room saw what was coming. No one noticed the way Renell's hand stayed fixed on the purse in her lap. No one saw Trinica watching her, not Ilium, like she already understood where this was headed. And Ilium kept talking, kept building a future in words, unaware that the past was already sitting in front of him, bloated, and listening. Ilium Trenholm's final words from the pulpit weren't a confession. They were a metaphor. He stood tall, hands lifted gently, voice smooth as ever. Sometimes, he said, the things we plant in silence bloom in the next season. The congregation murmured approval. Heads nodded. A few whispered amen. To them, it was another polished line in a message about growth and redemption. But Renell Trenholm heard it differently. She rose from her seat without urgency. No trembling. No panic. Just deliberate movement. Her heels tapped softly against the sanctuary floor as she stepped into the aisle. No one stopped her. No one knew why she was walking forward. This was the pastor's wife. Who questions her? She didn't climb the steps. She didn't face the crowd. She stood at the edge of the altar, looked her husband in the eye, reached into her purse, and pulled out a small handgun. For a split second, the room froze. Ilium blinked. And Renell spoke. Tell them what you planted in Corus's garden. 2 shots. Both to the chest. No hesitation. Ilium fell backward, knocking over his Bible and mic stand. The echo of the second shot hung in the sanctuary like a curse no one knew how to lift. People screamed. Others ducked. Some simply stood paralyzed, unsure if what they just saw was real. Security never had time to act. Police were called within minutes. But by the time they arrived, the message had already been delivered. Not by Ilium, by the one person who had protected him the longest. And in the silence that followed, no one dared say her name. Not yet. Because in that moment, everyone was still trying to make sense of the garden. Renell Trenholm didn't resist arrest. She didn't cry. She didn't speak until asked why she shot her husband in front of a church full of people. Her answer was cold, flat, and final. Check the backyard. It was all she gave them. Within hours, police sealed off the Denton property. Yellow tape looped around the garden, the fence, the side door where Keon Neil used to slip in unnoticed. A warrant was issued before sundown. By morning, cadaver dogs had zeroed in on the concrete slab behind the rosebed, the same one poured just days after Corus was last seen. They broke through the top layer slowly. Then came the dirt. Then the stench. What they pulled from beneath wasn't just Corus Denton's remains. It was a body positioned in a way that told them she hadn't been laid to rest. She'd been disposed of. Wrapped in a bedsheet. Weighed down by bricks. No signs of formal burial. Just a cold hole filled with silence, sealed by the hands of a man who had preached about transparency while burying the evidence of his own collapse. The footage from the USB drive confirmed it all. Ilium alone, dragging her body. No panic. No hesitation. No plea for help. Just movement, timing, calculation. The time stamp lined up with the night neighbors recalled hearing muffled voices and a brief commotion in the yard. Everything Renell had claimed, silently, then publicly, fell perfectly into place. What came next was the unraveling. It didn't take long for the investigation to shift from what Ilium Trenholm did to who else knew. Text records pulled from Ilium's phone revealed an encrypted conversation between him and a senior board member dated nearly 4 weeks before the shooting. The topic, Corus. The message, clear. Ilium admitted there had been an incident, that Corus had overreacted, and that the situation was handled. The board member's response was short, but damning. Then keep it buried. We can't afford another loss. Authorities questioned the entire leadership team. What surfaced was a slow, shameful unraveling. Multiple leaders admitted they had long suspected something was wrong, Not just with Corliss's disappearance, but with the sudden presence of Keon Neil, the young man quietly housed in the basement without formal process, training, or documentation. Some had asked questions. Most had stayed silent. The reason was always the same: fear of scandal. One board member confessed under pressure that she'd received a voicemail from Corus the night before she vanished. In it, Corus begged for a meeting, said she'd discovered something unforgivable. The call was never returned. The voicemail was deleted. Another leader admitted he'd seen a disturbing moment between Ilium and Keon after a late-night men's group meeting. When asked why he didn't speak up, he told investigators, "Because last time we questioned him, he threatened to shut everything down. And people needed what we were doing." What Ilium had built wasn't just a church. It was an illusion of progress. A place where people could point and say, "This is what redemption looks like." So when that image cracked, the instinct wasn't to report it, it was to reinforce it. But the damage didn't stop at leadership. As word spread, donors began to withdraw. Funding vanished almost overnight. Counseling programs were suspended. The outreach center closed. Some members left quietly. Others stayed, defiantly clinging to the idea that Ilium had been misunderstood, that he was being attacked by the enemy. Protest signs appeared outside the building. So did detectives. The community fractured. Some mourned Corus. Others blamed Renell. Still others refused to believe any of it, claiming everything was fabricated by people who couldn't handle strong leadership. But the truth had already cemented itself. A woman was dead. A young man had been exploited and discarded. And a church, built on second chances, chose reputation over repentance. In the end, the cover-up wasn't just a failure of leadership. It was a collective choice. To protect the lie. Longer than the woman who tried to expose it. The state charged Renell Trenholm with second-degree murder, citing clear intent, a loaded weapon, and a public execution carried out in broad daylight. They called it vigilante justice, calculated, cold, and inexcusable. The prosecution framed her as a woman who could have gone to the police, could have left, could have done anything but what she did. They showed the church footage frame by frame. They slowed down the moment her hand dipped into the purse. They counted the seconds between the shots. But her defense came armed with something far heavier than footage. They came with context. They laid out a detailed timeline. The moment Corus disappeared, the manipulated narrative Renell was told to repeat, the anonymous USB drive, the video of Ilium burying Corus in the garden, and the 6 days Renell sat with that knowledge while sleeping beside a murderer. They argued that Renell wasn't just a pastor's wife. She was the final witness in a long chain of cover-ups. That what she did wasn't revenge, but release. They didn't ask the jury to approve her actions. They asked them to understand them. And then came Keon Neil. Under a grant of full immunity, Keon testified for the first time. He spoke plainly, without emotion. He described how Ilium took him in under the promise of mentorship. How that mentorship blurred lines. How the manipulation was slow, layered in spiritual language, framed as healing. He admitted he stayed quiet because he was ashamed, confused, and because Ilium controlled everything. His housing, his job, his access to the church. Then Trinica Denton was called. She didn't break. She didn't cry. She read a 3-minute statement that left the courtroom frozen. My mother died because she saw something she wasn't supposed to, and because she wasn't the kind of woman to pretend it didn't happen. Renell didn't kill a pastor. She killed the performance. She killed the silence. She did what this whole community should have done months ago. The room didn't move when she sat down. Deliberation took 11 hours. The jury returned with a verdict that didn't please anyone entirely. Guilty, but with mitigating circumstances. Renell was sentenced to 9 years, eligible for parole in 4. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't gasp. It just sat there, divided down the middle, some furious that she'd walked into a church and pulled a trigger, others furious that she'd been left to carry a secret no one else was brave enough to name. It wasn't justice. It was what was left of it. The house didn't feel like Corus anymore. By the time Trinica Denton returned to clear it out, the backyard had already been torn apart by forensics, the concrete slab jackhammered into dust. What remained was the frame of a life interrupted, faded furniture, unopened mail, and quiet reminders of a woman who never got the chance to tell her side before someone else buried it. There was no final letter. No written warning. Nothing sentimental waiting in a drawer to bring clarity. Just silence. The kind her mother had fought against in her last breath. The community tried to move on. The church building remained shuttered, its windows boarded, its name removed. A few former members gathered elsewhere, pretending it wasn't the same. Some still argued Renell should have gone to the police. Others believed she was forced into the corner they all helped build. Keon Neil left town. His name stopped appearing in coverage. But his face lingered in every discussion about who gets protected and who gets left behind. Renell served her sentence without appealing. She gave no interviews. No statements. No memoir. Nothing for the public to dissect. But in Augusta, people remembered. Not just the garden or the gun or the scandal. They remembered how long it took anyone to believe a woman was missing. How long it took to question a pastor whose voice was louder than the facts. How quickly a church chose order over truth. And how, when no one else said anything, it was the woman who sat silent for years who finally did.